Hey, did you know that around 85% of you watching aren't subscribed? If you're enjoying the content, please take a second to hit that subscribe button. It really helps out. Thanks. It all started when I matched with Raj on Tinder. I wasn't really expecting anything serious, just looking to meet someone new. His profile was different from the usual ones I saw. He had a thick Indian accent when he messaged me, and he seemed genuinely interested. We texted back and forth for a few days, and his messages were always sweet and thoughtful. He asked me all the right questions, and it felt like we had a real connection. His pictures were decent, but there was nothing too fancy, just some shots of him at what looked like family gatherings and a few travel pics. I didn't think much of it. Raj seemed nice enough, so we decided to meet in person. He picked a cafe on the outskirts of town for our first date. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting at a table near the window. He looked just like his pictures, maybe a bit taller than I expected, but nothing too out of the ordinary. I walked over to greet him, and that's when I noticed the accent. It wasn't subtle at all. It was thick, almost hard to understand at first. I didn't let it bother me, though. I'm not one to judge, and it didn't seem like a big deal at the time. We sat down, and I thought the conversation was going pretty well. He seemed charming, in a way that made me feel comfortable. He laughed at my jokes, asked about my family, and shared some things about his background. The way he spoke about his life back in India was kind of interesting. I could tell he had a bit of a different view on things, but that was part of the charm. It felt refreshing to talk to someone with a perspective different from my own. But as the date went on, I started to notice something a little off. Raj seemed to ask an unusual number of questions about my life, almost like he was trying to gather information, but I brushed it off. Maybe he was just curious. I wasn't really sure what he was looking for, but I didn't want to make things awkward by asking. After the date, we continued texting, and the conversation felt even more comfortable. He would message me almost every day, asking how my day was, how my family was doing, and he'd tell me about his day at work, or what he had done in his free time. But there was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on, that started to bug me. It was like he was being a little too interested in the details of my life. It wasn't just casual conversation anymore. He started talking about future plans, things that involved me being part of his life in a way that didn't seem to match the length of time we had been talking. Like he already saw me as a long-term partner, even though we hadn't even been on more than 2 dates. At first, I thought maybe he was just eager, but after a while, I started feeling more and more uncomfortable. I couldn't pinpoint why, but it just didn't feel right. Then came the night that I found out what was really going on. I had been talking to a friend of mine about Raj, and she asked me a question I hadn't really thought about before. How long has he been in the country? She asked. I paused for a second because honestly, I didn't know the answer. I had never asked him about how long he had been living here, or what his immigration status was. To me, it didn't matter. He seemed like a nice guy, and we were getting along, so I never questioned it. But for some reason, that question made me want to dig a little deeper. I started thinking about it more, and the pieces started to fall into place in a way that felt all too calculated. He had never shared much about his job, or how he was able to afford certain things. He'd always keep his answers vague, brushing off questions like it was nothing. That's when I decided to Google his name. I'm not proud of it, but I had to know. I typed Raj Kumar immigration status into the search bar just to see if there was anything about him online. I didn't find anything on social media, which seemed odd, considering he had always said he was active on Facebook. But what I did find stopped me dead in my tracks. There, in plain sight, was a news article. A piece about a man named Raj Kumar, who had been arrested for attempting to marry a woman for a visa. He had been using women to get a foothold in the country, manipulating them into relationships so they'd help him get his green card. The article even mentioned how he'd used different names over the years, changing his appearance and hiding his true intentions behind a series of fake profiles. The whole thing made my stomach churn. I felt my heart drop. It hit me hard. Raj wasn't who he said he was. He wasn't looking for a genuine relationship. He was using me. He had been setting me up for months, playing a careful game, pretending to be someone I could trust, all for the chance to get a visa. Everything clicked into place. The overeagerness, the fast-moving relationship, the constant push to involve me and his future plans. It was all part of the same scheme. I was completely dumbfounded. How had I not seen it earlier? I felt betrayed, embarrassed, and honestly, a little scared. I knew I had to cut things off immediately. But how do you even confront someone like that without putting yourself in a dangerous position? I wasn't about to get caught up in some manipulation game just because I ignored red flags. The next time Raj messaged me, I didn't respond. I blocked him on everything. Tinder, text, email, all of it. I didn't feel safe anymore, and I wasn't going to be part of his plan. He probably thought I was just another clueless girl. But I wasn't about to let him use me. For a long time after that, I kept thinking about how easy it is to get fooled by people online. How they can hide behind a screen, lie about who they are, and manipulate someone into thinking they're something they're not. I'll never forget Raj, and I'll never let myself fall for something like that again. But what freaked me out the most? I know there are probably tons of other women out there who were in the exact same situation I was, and I bet they didn't even know it. So there I was, swiping through Tinder late one night, like I usually do when I'm bored. It's been a slow couple of weeks, nothing serious, just the usual matches and half-hearted conversations that go nowhere. That was until I came across Rennie's profile. She had this cute smile, a bit of an edgy vibe, and some pretty chill photos. Nothing over the top, but enough to catch my eye. We started talking, and it felt easy, you know, like super casual. She was funny, told me she liked all the same stuff I did, and we joked around a lot. It was a breath of fresh air, honestly. She wasn't playing games. After a couple of days, she asked if I wanted to meet up. She said she was free that weekend and suggested a place. It was just some random parking lot near an old strip mall, in town. At first I thought it was a little strange. Like, why a parking lot? But then again, I didn't want to be that guy who overthinks everything. Maybe she just liked places with less foot traffic. Whatever. I was into the idea of meeting someone new, and honestly, she seemed cool. I was eager to see what she was, really like outside of the chat. The day of the date came around, and I was feeling a bit nervous but also kind of excited. I hadn't been on a date in a while, and she seemed like someone I could actually click with. I threw on a clean shirt, jeans, and sneakers. Not too dressed up, but not underdressed either. I got to the parking lot a bit early. It was one of those weird places where there was barely anyone around, just a few parked cars, and the distant sound of cars passing by on the highway. It felt empty, almost deserted. I parked my car, checked my phone, and sent Rennie a message to let her know I was here. She responded pretty quick, saying she'd be there in 5 minutes. I decided to just chill in my car and wait. About 10 minutes later, I saw a figure walking toward my car. It was her. She looked exactly like her pictures. Same smile, same kind of style. I got out to meet her, and we exchanged a quick hug. She had a nice vibe, and honestly, I felt a little better. Like, she was easy to talk to, and I could see how this could turn into something fun. We chatted for a bit, just the usual, how was your week stuff, but the whole time I couldn't shake this weird feeling. There was this emptiness about the parking lot. It felt like we were being watched, but I told myself it was just the setting. You know, late at night, not many people around, just a random spot. Rennie seemed fine, though. Maybe she was just the type of girl who liked things low-key. We talked for a while, and I remember thinking everything was going fine, until she asked me if I wanted to take a walk. She mentioned there was a little shortcut around the back of the mall, so I figured, why not? It would give us a chance to talk more, away from the cars and the dim lights of the parking lot. We started walking, and I'm not even sure when it happened, but something shifted. As we walked down the path behind the strip mall, it got quieter and darker. The streetlights were way off in the distance, and the only thing I could hear was our footsteps. Rennie's vibe had changed too. She wasn't as talkative anymore, and it felt like she was purposely leading me further down this path that didn't seem like it was going anywhere. I kept thinking, this is weird. Maybe I'm overthinking it. But I didn't want to be the paranoid guy on a date. The further we walked, the more I felt like something wasn't right. She hadn't said much in the last few minutes, and I realized she hadn't even mentioned where we were going. I looked around, but there was nothing. Just the occasional flicker of a broken streetlight. I stopped walking and asked if we should head back. She turned and smiled at me, and that's when I saw it. The look in her eyes wasn't the same. Before I could react, I heard some rustling from behind a nearby dumpster, and out of nowhere, 3 guys stepped out. I froze. They were tall, rough-looking, with hoodies and baseball caps, and they all had that same kind of predatory stare. I was instantly on edge. I felt the blood drain from my face. One of the guys stepped forward, giving me a look that made my stomach drop. Rennie, still standing right next to me, looked at the group of them and then back at me, and suddenly everything clicked. The way she had kept me talking, the way she'd led me down this path, it was all a setup. They were waiting for me. They had been waiting for me. My mind was racing. I was trying to process what was happening, but my heart was already pounding in my chest. I looked at Rennie again, and for a split second, I saw the fake smile drop from her face. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. It wasn't a date. It was a trap. She had set me up. One of the guys stepped closer, his eyes never leaving mine. I knew what was about to happen. They weren't here to just chat. They were here to do something. I didn't even have time to think. I bolted. I turned and ran as fast as I could back toward the parking lot, hearing them yell behind me. The adrenaline was coursing through my body. I was almost back to my car when I felt the first hit. One of them had caught up and shoved me from behind. I was out of breath, my heart pounding, but I kept pushing forward. I got to my car, yanked the door open, and slammed it shut behind me. I didn't even bother to check if they were following. I just floored it, getting the hell out of there as fast as I could. My hands were shaking. My whole body was wired with fear. I couldn't believe it. I had just narrowly avoided being jumped, maybe worse. That night still haunts me. I never went back to that parking lot. I blocked Rennie on everything. And to this day, I have no idea what the hell she was really up to. But I know one thing. She wasn't just a girl on a Tinder date. She was something else entirely. And I was lucky to escape before I found out exactly what that something was. It all started on Tinder, of course. It always does, right? You swipe, you match, and you start chatting. Nothing out of the ordinary. I've been on my fair share of dating apps, but this one felt different. I don't know why. I guess it was the way Sheldon seemed so mysterious. At first, that was kinda hot. He wasn't like the other guys I'd matched with. He didn't have his whole life plastered all over social media, and I could respect that. The more we talked, the more intrigued I became. Sheldon had this whole thing about privacy. He told me he wasn't on social media because he didn't see the point of it. I thought it was a little weird at first, but okay, cool, whatever. He seemed like one of those I live in the moment types, and for some reason, that drew me in. We'd texted for a few days before he suggested we meet up. I was nervous, of course. Meeting someone you've only ever talked to online is always a little risky. But I liked him. His messages were charming, thoughtful, and he made me laugh. He seemed real, too real. We set up a date for the weekend. I was already picturing how it would go. A nice little dinner, maybe a drink after. Nothing too crazy. The night of the date, I showed up early to the bar, just to be on the safe side. I scanned the crowd, but no sign of him. I wasn't really surprised. We had talked about how awkward the first meeting could be, so I figured he'd be just as nervous as me. Then, about 10 minutes later, I saw him. Or, I thought I did. The guy who walked in was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed casually but sharply. He had dark hair, and this easy confidence about him that made it clear he was used to getting attention. I was still looking him over when he turned and caught my eye. And then, I saw it. Those same eyes from his Tinder profile. It was definitely him. He walked over, and I stood up to greet him. We hugged, awkwardly at first, but then things settled, and we started chatting like old friends. I remember feeling an odd sense of comfort with him right away, like we had known each other for years. But there was this nagging feeling in the back of my head, something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't that he was weird or off-putting. No, he was charming, easy to talk to, and we had some decent chemistry. But that little voice in the back of my head kept telling me that something was off. The night went pretty smoothly. Too smoothly. We had dinner, and I found myself laughing at almost everything he said. It felt normal. Almost too normal. The more we talked, the more I got the sense that he was hiding something. The conversation would occasionally veer into strange territory, and whenever I asked about his past, he'd skirt the question. He'd say things like, "Oh, I don't really like to talk about the past," or, "It's a long story, maybe another time." It wasn't a huge deal, but it was starting to bug me. Was he hiding something? And if so, why? At some point, I noticed how he didn't really have any friends he talked about either. No mention of a family, no talk about a job or a career. It was like he existed in a vacuum. Just him and me. No history. When I asked about his job, he changed the subject. That's when it hit me. He didn't have a job. No real career. He was just there. When the date was winding down, I decided to do something that I don't usually do. I pulled out my phone and Googled his name. I didn't know why I did it. Maybe it was the uneasy feeling that had been creeping up the entire night. Something about Sheldon just wasn't adding up. But when I typed his name into Google, I didn't find the profile of a happy-go-lucky guy who loved privacy. Instead, I found a completely different version of him. A much darker, more disturbing version. His name wasn't just Sheldon. It was some other name, too. One I didn't recognize. The result? A public record from a few years ago. It wasn't exactly what I expected. The words on the screen made my stomach lurch. Previous offender. It wasn't just a simple offense either. This guy had a criminal history. And not just any history, a serious one. Suddenly everything clicked. His weirdness, the way he avoided talking about his past, the fact that he had no social media. It all made sense. He was trying to hide something, and it wasn't just a bad ex or a failed relationship. I quickly backed out of the browser, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to play it cool, like I hadn't just uncovered this guy's entire history. But in that moment, I felt trapped. I was sitting across from a guy who was pretending to be someone he wasn't. Someone who had literally gone to great lengths to erase parts of his past. How could I not have seen it? How could I have missed every red flag? I kept my composure, though. I didn't want to make a scene, especially not in a public place. We finished our drinks, and the whole time, I could barely focus on what he was saying. My mind was racing. What was I supposed to do? I couldn't just leave, could I? That would be too obvious. And yet, I didn't want to spend another second with him. I had already seen enough. When he offered to walk me to my car, I agreed. But my mind was made up. I wasn't going to see him again. The whole walk, I kept looking around, half expecting someone to jump out of the shadows and grab me. My thoughts were spinning. Was he dangerous? Was this just some weird coincidence? I didn't know, but I couldn't ignore what I'd seen. We got to my car, and I quickly thanked him for the night and told him I had to get going. He seemed a little confused, but he didn't push it. I could see the disappointment on his face, but I wasn't sticking around to find out if it was real or just part of his act. I blocked him on everything that night. Tinder, text, everything. I didn't want to take any chances. I could have called the cops or something. But honestly, I wasn't sure if I even needed to. His criminal record was old, and he hadn't done anything overtly threatening. But it didn't matter. I knew I couldn't let it slide. I had dodged a bullet, and I wasn't sticking around to see if I'd get hit next time. When I got home, I sat in my car for a minute, trying to steady my breathing. It was like everything had been a lie, and I had just stumbled onto the truth in the worst possible way. Sheldon, or whatever his name was hiding a past that no one should have to hide. And I had been too caught up in the charm to see it for what it really was. I'll never forget that night, and I'll never ignore the little voice inside me again. It's crazy how easily someone can hide in plain sight. So, I met this girl named Sally on a dating app. It wasn't anything serious at first, just a few messages here and there. She looked like the type of girl who was into all the things I liked. Books, photography, random little coffee shops. Honestly, I thought I'd found someone who was normal, you know? She had that cool girl next door vibe, which at the time seemed like a perfect match for me. Her pictures were really good too. Not like the typical over-filtered stuff most people post. They seemed real. Candid shots of her walking around the city, sitting at a cafe, and one where she was smiling in front of an old bookstore. Nothing too flashy, but it was enough to make me think she was someone I could really talk to. We'd been chatting for about a week. There was something about her energy that felt different from most people I'd met online. It was like we clicked right away. She wasn't the type to ask basic questions like, "What do you do for a living?" or "Where are you from?" She just talked about life, like she already knew me. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt nice to not have to play the usual dating game where everything feels forced. Eventually, she brought up meeting up in person. I was excited, honestly. I'd been talking to her for long enough that it felt like meeting her face to face wouldn't be as awkward as it could have been with other people. We decided on a cafe in the middle of the city. Nothing fancy, just a quiet spot with good coffee. The first time we were supposed to meet, she canceled last minute. It wasn't a big deal at first. She said she wasn't feeling well, and I just let it go. We rescheduled for a few days later, and again, she canceled. This time, she gave me this excuse about something personal coming up, but I was starting to get a little frustrated. It wasn't like I was in a rush to meet her, but after 2 failed attempts, I was starting to wonder what was going on. I didn't want to seem pushy, so I just said, "No problem." and told her we'd figure it out whenever she was ready. Couple of days later, I got a message from her asking if I wanted to meet up for lunch at the same place. This time I didn't hesitate. We'd been talking for a while, and I was getting curious about her. The idea of finally seeing her in person was exciting, and honestly, I thought this was the moment things were going to click in real life, just like they had over text. When I walked into the cafe, I looked around, expecting to see her sitting, at a table or maybe near the window, like in one of her pictures. I didn't see anyone who looked like her. I checked my phone to see if she had texted me. Maybe she was running late or sitting at a different table. But there was nothing. Texted her, asking if she was already there. She replied almost immediately, saying she was just running a bit late and that she was on her way. I figured, okay, no big deal. I ordered a coffee and sat down to wait. 20 minutes passed, then an hour, and still nothing. I was starting to get that uneasy feeling you get when you've been stood up, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe something came up. Maybe she really was on her way. Just as I was about to get up and leave, I heard a voice behind me. It was soft and a little shaky, but I turned around expecting to see her. What I saw instead made my stomach drop. The person who spoke was an older man, probably in his mid-60s, with thin gray hair and glasses. He was standing there, looking at me like he was unsure whether he had the right person. At first, I didn't know what to think. He seemed confused, like he had just wandered into the cafe by mistake. But then, he said something that completely caught me off guard. "Are you waiting for Sally?" I froze. My mind raced. I was suddenly putting two and two together, but it didn't make sense. "Yeah, I am," I said, trying to stay calm, though. My voice came out shaky. "Do you know her?" He smiled awkwardly and nodded. "She's running a little late, but she asked me to come meet you. She told me to tell you she's sorry." I didn't know how to respond. My mind was reeling. This guy had no business being here. There was something wrong with the whole situation. But I didn't want to be rude. Maybe he was a relative or a friend who was helping her out for some reason. I mean, I still had no idea who this guy was, so I just nodded and sat back down. But as he sat across from me, something felt really, really off. He didn't look like the kind of person who'd be friends with someone like Sally. He looked way older than I expected. And his mannerisms? They didn't match the kind of person Sally seemed to be. This guy had a weird energy, like he was trying too hard to act casual. He kept talking about how Sally was nervous about meeting in person, that she didn't want to rush things, so she'd asked him to help break the ice. He made this awkward little chuckle, but I couldn't get rid of the feeling that he was stalling. I asked him where Sally was, and he just gave me some vague answer, like she had changed her mind at the last minute. By now I was starting to panic a little. This guy's story didn't add up. He wasn't acting like he knew Sally at all. His behavior was too forced, too rehearsed. He was clearly trying to distract me, but from what? After another long stretch of silence, he finally got up, excused himself, and left. I sat there for a while, trying to make sense of everything. I wasn't sure what the hell had just happened. But when I looked at the empty table across from me, I realized something that made my skin crawl. There had never been a woman named Sally. It took me a few more weeks to piece everything together. When I tried to contact Sally again, the profile was gone. All the messages, all the photos, nothing. It was like she had never existed. But the guy? I'll never forget his face. He wasn't just some random guy at a cafe. He had been pretending to be someone else. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but I knew one thing for sure. I was never going back to that cafe. and I was definitely never getting sucked into a weird situation like that again. It was like I was part of some twisted game, and I had barely made it out. I matched with this guy named Luke at the end of last summer. I remember it clearly, because I had just quit my job at a call center and was stuck in this weird limbo where I had too much free time and zero motivation. It was stupid hot outside, like the kind of heat that makes you feel gross just sitting still. So I was spending most of my days in bed with the fan blowing on me, just scrolling through dating apps, not looking for anything serious, just something to kill time and maybe distract me from how stuck I felt. Luke's profile came up, and at first, I honestly thought it was fake. His photos looked like they were taken straight from a lifestyle blog or some brand campaign. There was one of him in a sleek kitchen pouring coffee, another on a yacht wearing sunglasses, and another one in what looked like a luxury hotel room with city lights behind him. His bio was short, just said, entrepreneur, travel often, looking for someone who can keep up. Normally I'd swipe left on that kind of thing, but I was bored, so I swiped right. He matched with me almost instantly, then he messaged me not even 2 minutes later. He was smooth, but not creepy, and he knew how to hold a conversation without making it all about himself. We talked for maybe 5 or 6 days, mostly late at night. He told me he was in town for a bit to check on a few properties, and that he hated how fake people in the city were. Said he liked that I seemed grounded and real. Honestly, he made me feel kind of special. Eventually, he asked if I wanted to get dinner. Said he knew this rooftop place that wasn't too flashy but had amazing food. I said sure, half expecting him to flake or cancel last minute like most guys do. But he didn't. He confirmed the time, gave me the address, and even said he'd send a car for me. The address he sent was downtown, near one of those high-rise condos that rich people post about. When I got there, it wasn't a restaurant at all. It was a residential tower. I texted him, and he said the rooftop spot was private, like residents only, and that he'd meet me in the lobby. I hesitated for a second, but figured maybe he lived there or knew someone who did. So I waited. When the elevator dinged and opened, I expected someone sleek and polished like in his photos. But the guy who stepped out looked different. His hair was messy. His shirt was wrinkled. He was still kind of attractive, but not in that high-end, curated way his pictures made him seem. He hugged me like we were old friends and thanked me for coming. I didn't say anything at first because I was still trying to figure out if this was actually the same guy. He led me upstairs, talking about how the restaurant plans fell through because of some kitchen issue, but he had a setup ready on the rooftop. I was too confused to push back. When we got to the top floor, we didn't go to a restaurant. We went through a maintenance door and up a sketchy staircase. The rooftop was just a flat surface with some folding chairs and an old cooler. No lights, no view, just wires and vents. I asked him what was going on, and he laughed like it was no big deal. He pulled out 2 sandwiches from the cooler and offered me one. I didn't take it. Something felt way off. That's when he got weirdly serious. He sat down, looked at me, and said he hadn't been honest. That he wasn't rich. That he didn't have a condo or a yacht, or any of the stuff from his pictures. Said the photos weren't even his. They were from this guy he used to follow online who had the kind of life he wanted. Said he had been living out of his car for a few months before crashing with a friend in the building below. I didn't know what to say. He went on about how tired he was of being ignored. How girls only cared about money. How this was the first time he felt like someone actually gave him a chance. I kept nodding, trying to stay calm, but my heart was racing. I didn't know what this was anymore. A confession, or some weird guilt, trip, or something else. I told him I needed to go, that I had plans early. He didn't argue, just nodded and said he understood. but the way he said it made me feel like I had disappointed him, like I was just like everyone else. When I got back to the lobby, I walked straight past the front desk and out to the street. No car, no Uber, nothing. I ended up walking 3 blocks to find a bus stop. On the way, I kept checking over my shoulder. I don't even know why. I didn't see him follow me, but something about the whole thing felt unfinished. That night, I blocked his number. I deleted the app. I thought it was over. 2 days later, I found a note in my mailbox. No stamp, no envelope. Just a folded paper that said, "I meant every word." That's it. Nothing else. I don't know how he found my address. I never told him. Never posted it anywhere. That's when I really started to panic. I stayed at a friend's place for a few days. When I got back, I asked the neighbor across the hall if they saw anyone hanging around, and she mentioned a guy who looked like he was waiting for someone by the stairwell a couple times. Said he didn't look like a delivery guy or anything. Just standing there. I never saw him again after that. No more notes, no messages, nothing. It's like he disappeared, or maybe just moved on to someone else. But sometimes when I walk through my building late at night, I still think about how easy it was for him to fake everything. How he pulled me into this lie so smoothly, like it was normal. And how close I got to sitting across from a stranger on a rooftop with no way out. This happened last year, around late October. I wasn't really into dating apps anymore, but I'd re-downloaded one because my friends wouldn't stop going on about how I was going to die alone if I didn't at least try, so I gave it another shot. I picked this low-key app called Haven because it had fewer bots and fake profiles, or at least that's what the reviews said. I matched with this girl named Freya. Not the usual name you hear, so it stood out. She looked like she belonged in a moody indie film or some kind of fashion campaign. Long dark hair, sharp cheekbones, kind of mysterious vibe. She wasn't posting bikini selfies or filters or anything like that. Her profile felt kind of quiet, but intentional. Like she wanted to be noticed, but not in a loud way. Her bio said something about being into photography, street food, and old bookstores. We talked for about a week. She typed like someone who actually thought about her words. No weird emojis, never over-explain things. It was kind of refreshing. I'd tell her something random, like how I got locked out of my car at a gas station once, and she'd somehow turn it into a philosophical convo about patience and frustration. It was weird, but interesting. Eventually, she asked if I wanted to meet up. She suggested this random cafe that I'd never even heard of. Said it was quiet and had good apple pie. I looked it up. Tiny place on the edge of this industrial district. Not sketchy exactly, just really out of the way. Like it wasn't meant for people who didn't already know about it. I almost bailed, honestly. I even had the app open to delete my account at one point. But something about the way she talked made me curious enough to go. So I drove there. It was cloudy, kind of cold. The place was small, tucked between an old battery shop and a locksmith's place. The windows were fogged, up from the inside, so I couldn't really see who was already there. I walked in and immediately saw her sitting at a table near the back. And yeah, she looked like her pictures. But something felt off instantly. It wasn't her face or her clothes or anything like that. It was more like the way she moved, or didn't move. She just sat there, completely still, staring at me with this faint smile, like she knew something I didn't. I walked up, trying not to act weird about it, and did what I always do when I meet someone new. I held out my hand for a shake. That's when I realized I messed up. She didn't shake it. She just looked at it. And I realized she only had one arm. Her left sleeve was folded and pinned at the side, tucked neatly, like this was normal for her. But I hadn't known. There was no mention of it in her profile. No clue in any of the photos. I stood there like an idiot, hand still hanging in the air, and she finally just nodded and told me to sit. It was awkward after that. The vibe shifted. Hard. I tried to act normal, like it didn't throw me off, but everything I said came out weird. I made some joke about how quiet the place was, and she just stared. I asked her how long she'd been into photography, and she said, "That's not why I wanted to meet you." I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. Then it got even weirder. She said she didn't like small talk, said she didn't really date, and that people were too obsessed with appearances and politeness. I nodded, trying to keep up. She leaned in closer and said I seemed different, less fake than the others. I didn't know what she meant by others, but I didn't want to ask. The whole time, she didn't touch her drink, didn't even glance at it. I drank mine just to have something to do with my hands. I noticed hers. The one hand she had was kind of bruised looking, like there were faint marks around her knuckles. Not fresh, just weirdly permanent, like her skin had gotten used to pressure. I stared a little too long and she noticed. She smiled again. Said she liked how observant I was. I told her I should probably head out soon and she nodded like she expected it, but she didn't say goodbye. She just said, "Next time, I'll show you something real." And I left. Fast, I sat in my car outside for a minute, trying to process it. Something about the whole thing felt like a setup, like I'd walked into a version of reality where people play by different rules. I looked back at the cafe. She was still there, just sitting completely still, staring out the window but not looking at anything. Later that night, I got a message from her. It wasn't through the app. It was a text. I never gave her my number. It just said, "Don't forget what you saw." Most people don't even get that far. I blocked the number, uninstalled the app. I figured that would be the end of it. But a week later, I came home and found something on my doorstep. It was an envelope. No name on it, just my address. Inside was a photo, black and white. It was me, sitting at the cafe, taken from the outside through the window. I don't remember anyone else being there. I definitely don't remember anyone with a camera. Underneath the photo, in tiny handwriting, it said, "You see now? You're part of it." I don't know what she meant. I don't know what it is. I don't even tell people this story anymore because it sounds fake, like I'm making it up for attention. But I still have the photo. I keep it in a drawer, face down. Sometimes I think about going back to that cafe, just to see if it's still there. But I never do. Some things just stop being part of the normal world after you touch them, and I'm not sure I'd make it out the same again. I met George on this app called Vibed. Not a lot of people know about it. It's one of those smaller dating apps that show up in Instagram ads late at night when you're half asleep and lonely enough to try anything. I wasn't expecting anything serious. I was just bored, honestly. Bored and kind of curious. I'd just gotten out of this boring situationship and wanted to feel like someone was into me again, even if it didn't go anywhere. George's profile didn't stand out that much. His pictures weren't that clear. Kind of blurry and dark, like they were taken at night or in a room with one light bulb. But he had this serious look on his face that made me think he was confident. Said he was 29, worked in media consulting, whatever that means, and lived in the city not too far from me. His bio was short. I like spoiling the right girl. At the time, that felt like a green light. Like maybe he was chill. Maybe he liked going on expensive dates. Maybe I'd get a nice dinner out of it. I didn't really think past that. We Messaged back and forth for a couple of days. He was kinda charming in a weird, old-school way. His grammar was perfect, and he always called me sweetheart, which I didn't love, but I let it slide. Most of the time he'd message late at night, always past 11. Said he worked late. Said he liked girls who were low drama and knew how to listen. That should have been a red flag, but I ignored it. Eventually, he asked to meet. He suggested coffee, which felt safe. We picked this cafe I'd never been to, something with a weird name like Grounded Roots. It was tucked behind a strip mall next to an empty laundromat and a vape shop. Kinda sketchy, but I said yes anyway. The day we were supposed to meet, I got ready like usual. Took my time, did my makeup, wore this green top I liked. I wasn't super nervous, but I had this weird pressure in my chest. Like something was a little off, but I couldn't explain it. I just brushed it off as nerves. I got there 5 minutes early and didn't see him anywhere. The cafe was mostly empty except for a couple in the corner and a guy on a laptop. I ordered a tea and sat near the window. 10 minutes passed, then 15. I started thinking maybe he'd flaked. Then I saw this older guy standing just outside the door, looking around like he was lost. He had on a brown jacket and a weird flat cap, and he kept adjusting his collar like he didn't want people to see his face. I glanced at him and looked away, then felt my phone buzz. "Hey, sweetheart, I see you." I looked up, and it hit me. The guy outside wasn't lost. That was George. He walked in and waved at me like everything was normal. And the first thing I noticed, he wasn't 29. Not even close. This man was easily in his 50s. He looked like someone's uncle who still wore cologne from the 90s. His face was rough, like leathery, and he smiled way too wide. I just sat there, frozen. I didn't know what to say or do. He sat down like this was totally fine, like I shouldn't be surprised. He said something about how photos never do people justice and how age is just a number. I didn't even respond. I kept staring at the table, hoping I could think of an excuse to leave. Then he said something that made my stomach twist. He said he wasn't looking for a regular relationship. He said he wanted a sugar baby, someone to spoil in exchange for companionship. That word felt dirty the way he said it. Not illegal, just gross. Like a layer of slime was suddenly on the whole conversation. I told him I had to go, made up some excuse about my mom calling. He grabbed my hand before I could stand up. Not hard, just enough to make it clear he didn't want me to leave yet. I pulled away, probably too fast, and he let go but stared at me the whole time. That look followed me all the way out of the cafe. I didn't turn around until I was in my car with the doors locked. I thought that was it. I blocked his number and deleted the app the same night. Felt a little sick, but mostly just embarrassed. Like, how did I not see that coming? But a week later, things got worse. I started getting emails. Not from him directly, at least not at first. They were from weird addresses, like random strings of numbers. The first one just said, "You looked even better in person." No name, no context. I deleted it. Then more came. One had a screenshot of my Instagram profile. One had a photo of me leaving work, taken from across the street. That one made me panic. I don't even know how he found out where I worked. I had nothing about it online. I reported it, changed all my passwords, went private on everything. Still, the emails didn't stop. One said, "You owe me a date." Another just said, "I'm patient." After a while, they slowed down, then stopped. I don't know if he got bored or found someone else to creep on. But for weeks, I felt like I was being watched. I stopped walking home, got rides everywhere, slept with the light on. Every time I saw someone in a brown jacket, my chest would lock up. It's been almost 6 months now. I still don't use dating apps. I still flinch when I get emails from unknown addresses, I never saw George again, but I think about him sometimes. How calm he was, how sure of himself, like he'd done it before, like I wasn't the first, probably not the last. And that cafe? It shut down 2 weeks later. Not because of him or anything, just ran out of business. But still, sometimes I wonder if he knew that when he picked the place. Like he wanted to meet somewhere no one would remember. Somewhere that would disappear, just like him. I don't usually talk about this, but it's been a while, and it still creeps into my head sometimes. I wasn't even looking for anything serious when it happened. Just bored, honestly. I had this part-time job doing late-night deliveries, and during breaks, I'd sit in my car scrolling through this cheap dating app. Nothing fancy. Just swiping through random profiles, chatting if someone matched. It was more about passing time than finding someone. Then I matched with this girl, named Tina. Her pictures looked great. Skinny, smiley, just a chill vibe. She didn't go overboard with filters or anything, which made her seem kind of real compared to most people on there. Her bio was short. Something like, "Just looking for someone real." I messaged her, and we started talking pretty fast. She replied almost instantly every time. That should have been the first red flag, honestly. No one replies that fast unless they're desperate or weirdly online all the time. We talked for about 3 days, mostly at night. She said she worked from home doing customer support or something. She was funny, sarcastic, but never really personal. I'd ask stuff about where she grew up, or what she liked to do, and her answers were always super vague. But whatever, I figured maybe she was just shy or didn't trust me yet. Eventually, she said she wanted to meet up. I wasn't expecting that so soon, but I agreed. We picked this quiet little diner on the edge of town. I don't even know why she chose that place. It's the kind of place old people go to die in peace. Dim lighting, dusty booths, just this weird frozen-in-time vibe. Anyway, I got there first. I waited in one of the back booths, messing with the salt shaker while checking the door every 5 seconds. I had this weird tension in my stomach, but I chalked it up to nerves. Then she walked in. At first, I didn't recognize her. She didn't look anything like the girl from the photos. Tina was bigger. Way bigger. Easily around 130 kilos. Her hair looked greasy, like she hadn't washed it in a while, and her clothes didn't fit right. Baggy sweatpants. A hoodie that had some kind of stain near the collar. I wouldn't have even noticed her if she hadn't walked straight up to me and said my name. I smiled out of instinct, said, "Hey." But inside, I was frozen. I wasn't judging her size. It was just the shock. She looked nothing like the person I'd been talking to, not even close. And the worst part? She acted like nothing was off, like this was all normal. She sat down across from me and just started talking. Fast, like I was already supposed to know her. She told me how happy she was to finally meet, how she had a good feeling about us. Her eyes never blinked. I'm not even kidding. She stared the whole time. Her pupils were huge, like she was on something, or maybe just didn't sleep. The waitress came and took our order, and Tina asked for this massive breakfast plate, even though it was almost 9 at night. I barely touched my food. She kept asking me personal stuff, like if I lived alone, how far away the diner was from my place if I had a dog. Stuff that didn't feel normal for a first meet. Not in that tone. It felt loaded. I tried to stay polite. I told her the truth, mostly. Yeah, I lived alone in a small apartment, nothing fancy. No dog. She smiled at that, not in a cute way, like she was making a mental list. After dinner, she insisted on driving me home. I said no, made up an excuse about needing to pick something up. She looked disappointed, but nodded. When I left, I didn't even go straight home. I drove around for like an hour, trying to figure out why I felt so messed up. The next morning, I had like 10 messages from her. They started out normal, then got off. One of them said she could tell we had a real connection. Another said she thought we were meant to live together. Another one just said, "You're not safe when you lie." That one stopped me cold. I blocked her, deleted the app. Thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. That night, I got a knock at my door. Not a knock, actually. More like a slow, heavy tap. I live on the second floor of this old building, with one of those narrow staircases you can hear from a mile away. I hadn't heard anyone come up. I didn't answer. Just looked through the curtain, and I swear it was her. Standing in the hallway, holding a paper bag. She didn't knock again. Just stood there, for a full 5 minutes. Then she walked away, but left the bag. I waited another hour before I opened the door. The bag had pancakes in it, cold, soggy, with a note that said, "You didn't finish dinner." I moved 2 days later, broke my lease, packed up everything I could fit in my car, and drove 4 hours to my cousin's place. Slept on his couch for 2 weeks before finding a new place. I never saw her again. But I did hear from her. About a month later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Just my name and a smiley face where the stamp should have been. Inside was a photo of me sitting at that diner. It was from behind the counter, like someone had taken it without me noticing. Underneath, in shaky handwriting, it said, "You looked better online too." That was it. Nothing else. I don't use dating apps anymore. Not because I'm scared, really. Just because now, every time I see someone's profile, I wonder how close they are already. Not online, not chatting, just waiting. Watching. Figuring out where I live. I still lock my windows at night, even the one in the bathroom. Especially that one. Thank you for watching till the end of the video. Now sit back, relax, and listen to an hour of calming rain sounds.